Welcome to Silverado's General Orientation Module 5. Today we're going to talk about the presentations that you just reviewed, the physical and emotional behaviors of dementia, and then also communication techniques for dementia residents. We're also going to be talking about resident rights, confidentiality, and elder abuse prevention and reporting. So you just completed the Managing Physical and Emotional Behaviors of Dementia. When a person with dementia has an unmet need or is frustrated, he or she may react either with a physical or an emotional behavior. Please remember that residents cannot control their behaviors, and most residents will have some challenging behaviors over the course of their dementia. It actually is almost 90% of residents with dementia that will have some kind of challenging behavior. It's important for associates to report any changes in behavior to your charge nurse as soon as that behavior is noticed. Challenging behaviors may be triggered by physical causes, things like being thirsty, having an infection. Emotional and psychological causes, things like anxiety, fright, fear, not understanding. Environmental causes. Someone enters your room and you're frustrated because you can't get them to leave, or someone takes one of your belongings, or there's loud music or overstimulation in the common area. Associates should try to determine the cause of the behavior to prevent injury to residents, either that resident or other residents or even associates. And please, as an associate, do not take any negative comments that a resident makes personally. This is the dementia causing this behavior. It has really nothing to do with you personally. Communication techniques was another presentation that you just completed, and that one is explaining some of the challenges that residents with dementia have. First, it talks about what communication is, which is the exchange or sharing of information between two or more people. And what happens with dementia is that language and communication decline, especially as the dementia progresses, and that resident isn't able to communicate in the normal way, which makes it such a challenge for us and for them. They get very frustrated in the earlier stages of dementia when they can't communicate an unmet need or a frustration that they're having or something that they need. So some of the problems that occur are word finding, delayed response, word salad, repeating words, questions, or phrases, and becoming nonverbal. And you just reviewed all of that in the e-learning module that you just completed. We're going to talk today about resident rights. And every state has very specific resident rights, but we're going to just talk about those that are common to every single state. So some of the general rights for all residents in any of our Silverado communities are to be treated with dignity and respect by all associates, to be granted privacy in medical treatment and who visits them when they have telephone calls. They're allowed to have an unopened mail, and then during personal care, they have a right to privacy. There's a right to confidentiality of all personal information and records. They have the right to care, services, and supervision that meet their individual needs and delivered by staff that are sufficient in numbers and qualifications and competency to meet their needs. In other words, we need to have staff who understand what residents need, and they have the tools or the knowledge of how to care for that resident and provide those services that they desire and require and need. They have the right to be served food of the quality and quantity necessary to meet their nutritional needs. They have the right to be free from neglect and the right to be free from any kind of abuse. They have the right to be free to participate in planning their care, which might even mean that they attend a service plan meeting. And they have the right to present grievances and recommend changes in policies and procedures, and to be free to contact the ombudsman for the community or even the state licensing personnel. So those are all resident rights that every state requires that we provide for our residents. And then each state has more specific requirements or resident rights, and you will learn about those as you take the resident right course for your specific state. Confidentiality is a huge issue, and it's Silverado's policy to keep all of our residents' personal and medical information private and confidential. Some of the examples of confidential information that are not to be shared include medical history and medical information, the past history of the resident. For example, was that resident ever in a drug rehab facility or in a mental institution of some kind? Mental health issues of the resident, that's all confidential. Financial information is confidential. And then personal information about the responsible party or the family is also confidential. And sometimes as an associate, families and even residents share with you really personal information about their past or about their money situation. All of that must be kept confidential. A resident's medical information may be provided to the resident's physician, state licensing personnel, and other healthcare providers that are directly involved with that resident's care and on a need-to-know basis. So if you're not sure about whether something can be shared, please talk to your DHS or your administrator or your supervisor, and they can help you to know whether or not that's something that you can share with other people. Who's entitled to receive confidential information? Well, the responsible party for that resident is entitled to receive all information. They can look at the chart, and there's some restrictions on that. I'll go over that in a minute. But they have the responsible party could be a family member, it could be a friend of that resident, or it could be a legally designated power of attorney, or a court-appointed guardian or conservator. And again, it could be a family member that doesn't have any written authority, but if that's the only family member that remains, then that would be the person that would make those decisions. An advance directive may also name a medical power of attorney or healthcare agent, and that person has the authority to make decisions about the resident's medical care. So the only people that are entitled to confidential information about a resident is whoever is responsible for that resident's care. Who is not entitled to confidential information about a resident? Well, any associates not directly caring for that resident, other residents, families and friends of other residents, and this happens frequently in our communities where, families get very close to all of our residents, and so they might notice that one of our residents is not in the community, and they might start asking questions. They might ask you, where's Tom? Is he at the hospital? Did he have a fall? What's happened to Tom? And that's information that we cannot share unless that person's entitled to the information, which would only be the responsible party of that resident. So when other families, even though they're well-intentioned and they really care about the resident, they cannot get that information from you. If that occurs, direct them to the charge nurse, and the charge nurse will help them to understand that. The other people that are not entitled to confidential resident information are visitors that come in and out of the community, or other family members of that resident who are not authorized to receive confidential information. So again, anytime you have someone asking information and you're not sure if they're entitled to know about that resident, then have them go to the charge nurse or the DHS or the administrator, and they can help you, determine, and they can take over with that, and they can help determine whether that person has the right to that information. So in 1996, the federal government was so concerned about confidentiality because it was a huge issue that they created the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act of 1996. That's a lot of words. They shortened it. We call it HIPAA, HIPPA. And that's just a way of being able to talk about it without having to have that whole mouthful of words. So HIPAA established a national minimum standard to protect an individual's medical record and personal health information. So we are not actually under the HIPAA guidelines or rules in assisted living. However, Silverado really strongly believes in resident confidentiality. And so we do many of the recommendations of HIPAA. So for example, we shred papers containing health or personal information about residents. We try to keep our computers that have resident information, closed when we're not using them and out of sight of other residents or visitors in the community. We have wellness centers that are locked when there's no one in them. Any office that has any confidential information about a resident should be locked when the associate is not in that office or in the wellness center. And we do keep medical records locked up in the wellness centers. And we only provide personal health information to authorized individuals. So I mentioned earlier that if a family wants to look at the medical record of their loved one, they need to put that request in writing. So if you are a nurse and you're asked to look at someone's chart by a family member, what you need to say is, gosh, please go and talk to our administrator or our director of health services and they'll help you with that. We never withhold our chart or information from families, but we have a process that families need to go through in order to look at the chart. And if there's any question about it, like I said, bring it to your DHS or your administrator's attention and they'll help you with that. Now we're going to talk about a different subject, one that's a very difficult subject because we have so many people that are older and that are dependent on others for care that are exposed to abuse. And so we're going to be watching an e-learning on abuse in just a few minutes. But I wanted to just mention a few things about reporting of abuse. It's extremely, extremely important that you understand as an associate of Silverado that you must report any elder abuse that is known or suspected in the community. So first, elder abuse is defined as any knowing, intentional, or neglect act by a caregiver or any other person that causes harm or a serious threat of harm to a vulnerable adult. So all associates working in any assisted living community, including Silverado, are mandated reporters. What that means is that all healthcare workers in any facility, but including Silverado, excuse me, must report known or suspected abuse or neglect. What do you report? Well, any known or suspected neglect or abuse of a resident. Abuse includes physical harm or potential physical harm, verbal or emotional abuse, financial abuse, or sexual abuse or neglect. All of these things will be discussed in great detail. All these types of abuse will be discussed in your presentation that you're going to watch in just a minute. So what is an elder or dependent person? What is the definition of that? It's any resident who's over the age of 60, or in some states over the age of 65, who is dependent on others for care. And of course, all of our residents are dependent on us for care because they have dementia. So they are considered an elder in some situations. If they're younger than 60 or 65, they still fall under this regulation because they are dependent on others for care. So all of our residents fall under this category of elder abuse prevention. So what do you do if you either see or suspect some kind of abuse? Well, immediately you want to notify the administrator, the DHS, or if they're not in the community, the charge nurse. And the first thing is we want to protect that resident. We want to make sure that no additional abuse can occur. So we're going to immediately protect that person. And then the administrator or the DHS or the charge nurse, if they're if they're not in the community, you would go to the charge nurse, and they will help you to notify the authorities, and there's paperwork involved, and then they would help you with all of that. So now you're going to watch the elder abuse prevention e-learning, and there'll be a little quiz with that. And then when you're finished with that, we'll pick up with module 6. Thank you so much.